All right, good morning, everyone. It looks like we've started, and appreciate your time this morning and talking a bit about test and measurement equipment. It's really been a subject for us for many, many years. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Dennis Kloss, the president and owner of Heartland, and we're glad to welcome Ken here to do the presentation today. And Ken will introduce himself in a second. And we've certainly been working with test and measurement equipment for many, many years, back from the days when we had a waveform and vector with each tape machine, right? Now we've moved along to maybe fewer pieces of test equipment, but their functionality is greatly enhanced, right? We do all of these things maybe at an engineering workstation. And then we still have, what we used to call shading positions for operators, which are definitely fewer than they used to be, but still important. It's that time of year that we're often looking at our budgets for next year. So we thought this was a good chance to go through the newest generation of equipment and what it does and what's standard and what options you have that are hardware and software as you're preparing your budgets. I know as we visit facilities, there's a lot of old equipment out there, and it's sometimes test equipment gets to the bottom of the budget somewhere and the last thing we think of, but then when we need it, it's so important. So I wanted to remind everyone we are recording the web session today, and we will send everyone here a link. So if there's something you want to repeat later, like what did you say? You don't have to take a picture of the screen or something like that. You'll get a copy of the recording of today's session for that reason. And we also have a chat here. So if you have questions, you can put your questions in the chat. Sometimes it's nicer for Ken to answer those when we're on the topic, not that we move on to another subject and then we have to get back to the question. So please feel free to use the chat. And we'll have a little time at the end for a Q&A session as well. So with that, I'll throw it off to you, Ken, to give us the current state of where we're at with the new products.
Gosh, thank you. I really appreciate it, Dennis. Thanks for having me. It's a great honor to be giving you guys this presentation and going into what the PRISM looks like and what your option sets are, and actually doing a little bit of a live demo too. So as Dennis had mentioned, please put questions in the chat. It's a lot more engaging if I can show you what you'd like to see as opposed to what I think you'd like to see. And with that, I'm going to actually go ahead and get started. So what we're looking at here is we now have 3 different form factors of our PRISM. And what you're seeing is a single touchscreen, a dual touchscreen, and a rasterizer in a 1RU box. So all of these devices are going to follow a same convention of licensing as well as feature sets. So what I typically like to do is I like to say you have the option of having a little matrix of your actual physical device and then the feature sets involved. So what we're looking at is our 100 series is going to be a SDI only. That's going to be baseband for its entire life. And that's something that you can use immediately in your facility. The 200 series is actually going to be a hybrid device with both SDI as well as SMPTE 2110 and IP capabilities via SFPs. And the 300 series is actually going to be the 200 series. So it will do both SDI and IP, but it will also do your baseband measurements of your cables with the eye pattern and jitter available. So to give you just a brief look at the devices, they are extremely small. They're very depth friendly, so you can put them in turrets, you can put them right in front of operators, and they take up minimal amounts of space. What we also have available is the ability to actually take this around and use this as a portable scope that you can carry around, and you can take a look at any of your signals, and you can use a V-mount or a gold mount battery with a 12-volt DC power supply. So the 200 series is quite similar. It has the SFP cages involved, and you can see here that you get a little bit more capability within the 200 series only because of the fact that it is going to be IP capable. Now, we've also come in and started to ship in November here our new MPP, which is really designed specifically for the post-production world. And the reason it's designed specifically for the post-production world is we listened to a lot of customer feedback, and what they wanted was a quieter device that was depth conscious. So we redesigned the box, and we actually added additional heat sinks and improved upon the fan placement and fan speeds so that honestly, I had to put my ear directly on the chassis to be able to hear it. It was quite impressive. So those are the different platforms available to you at this point in time. And as previously mentioned, you're able to do either SDI, SDI and IP, or SDI IP and the eye pattern and jitter for your baseband measurements, just depending on what you'd like to see. So I'm going to go through some of the tool sets that we have and what you're able to do with them, and then we'll actually go in and take a look at how easy it is to operate the PRISM. So things that you are all very familiar with in terms of your standard video operations, as Dennis had mentioned, your waveform, your vector scope, your dual diamond display. And these are things that just come standard with the device. And they're what you typically think of when you think of a standard scope. So moving forward, we actually have the ability to do both monitoring and diagnosing of 2110 networks within the PRISM. And that's going to be done with our IP feature set. So you can actually take a look at what streams are coming in, what they look like in terms of a wide, narrow, narrow linear, and actually take a look at what the stream is doing inside of the network. So it's useful in both creating a 2110 network, but also monitoring and diagnosing 2110 issues. The prod feature enables a lot of different HDR tool sets where we're talking about things like false color. We're talking about looking at things like the CIE chart. There will be a couple of features coming in the near future so that you could actually take a look at what's inside of or outside of your 2020 color space based upon the CIE chart, as well as tools within the picture display. The ENGQC license is something that I believe that every engineering team needs. So that's looking at all of your ancillary data. So if you're doing things like closed captioning, if you're doing things like SCSI 104 triggers, anything in the ancillary data space, we can not only look at a graph of where these things are in terms of placement in the video, but we can actually go as deep as looking at the individual bits and finding out where that hex code is and making sure that that hex code is correct. A feature set that is always useful in coax plants is going to be the physical measurements of eye pattern and jitter to make sure that you're actually looking at what you think that you're going to look at in terms of cable performance. Our audio feature sets are able to look at phasing, you're able to look at loudness, we're able to look at the correlation between channels, and then we start to get into some more newer technologies, not newer technologies, but more advanced technologies in Dolby decoding and taking a look at surround sound and your actual surround sound beds and how they're operating. And again, we can show this in just a little bit here. One of my favorite new features coming out in this 4.0 release that will be at the end of August is the ability to shade up to 4 independent SDI inputs on a single tile. And that's done with our multi-license. So you're not stuck into having just one input fed by a router, but we can actually look at 4 discrete inputs on the scope. So that's something where it's all 12G capable. You're not going to be stuck to one 12G or 4 3Gs. You are able to look at multiple 12G devices if that's something that you so choose. And finally, we're taking a look at just a bar generator that you can use to quickly troubleshoot and diagnose paths, where we both do SDI as well as IP based on the device that you choose via 100 or 200 level. Now, a lot of people are starting to step into the world of IP and not even necessarily SMPTE 2110, but the ability to remote control devices and to look at scopes and to have a collaborative process to actually work with not only vendors, but other people in your plant to take a look at issues, to be able to prove to different manufacturers that there's something going on, if it's intermittent. And we're actually coming out with the ability to do WebRTC in this 4.0 release that will be available in the end of the month. So currently you can control your PRISM via no VNC, which you have full capability. It's like you're standing right in front of the device. Teams will not necessarily show us how smooth the video is, just due to the way that it's going to encode the video that I'm also encoding, but I will show you that in just a little bit here. So WebRTC is going to be a really great tool for everybody to use. So you can see here, I'm actually able to choose my bit rate up at the very top, so I can be network conscientious. I can actually have a conversation inside of the unit with other people that are looking at the device. And I can actually record the entire output of the PRISM just by hitting this record button. So the record will download directly to your computer, and you'll be able to send that off to other engineers, to our support team to help you diagnose issues. Now, something that's coming out in the August release as well is the ability to look at your external reference waveform. So this was a feature set that we had wanted to add back in for quite a while now, and it is coming out in this August release. The ability to look at blackburst in tri-level, well, any analog at this point, but the ability to look at it and make sure that you're actually getting what you're expecting is extremely important to make sure that your sync is proper within your plant. So that's something that we're really excited to introduce. As I had previously mentioned, you can see here the cam mode, so you can use up to 4 inputs into a single tile, and you can actually get the thumbnails alongside of either a Luma or a RGB, whatever you kind of prefer to see in terms of shading multiple inputs on the same tile. So that's a brief overview of what the devices are capable of. And now I'd like to actually go ahead and show you the device. So what you're seeing here is our WebRTC platform that will be released in August. A little preview for you. And you can see here, I can control the device just as if I'm standing right in front of it. So within the device here, I have all of my tools directly available to me right at the bottom row here. So the first thing that I'd like to point out is the ability to create presets. So we have multiple banks of presets available so that you can easily call up your most used setups, your most used tiles, your most used inputs, so that you can actually go straight into it and look to make sure that everything is exactly how you expected it without having to go and define inputs to make sure that you're looking at the right thing, choosing the correct tiles. It's a very quick and efficient way to go in. So I can do something as simple as recalling different presets. You can see here that I've actually decided that I want my program to be larger on the left-hand side, and then just have a basic waveform and vector scope on the right-hand side. So this would be like a standard shading situation where you're looking at your picture and making sure that you're staying legal. Now, where this starts to get interesting is the ability to actually look at HDR. So I can look at an HLG path up here, which you can see because I've decided that I actually want to see, what's coming in. So I've actually gone ahead and I've put a 709 LUT on this so that I can shade both HLG and 709 and make sure that I'm going to stay legal in both and make sure that both actually look okay. Similarly, you can see here that I like to use the false color tool just to make sure that I'm staying where I want to stay in my Luma space, and I'm able to make sure my HDR percentage is what I expect. So we'll go just through a couple more of these presets, and then we'll show you how easy it is to actually go ahead and make adjustments to these things and customize them to how you'd like. So similarly for audio operators, what I can do here is I can take a look at making sure that my surround sound, that all of my beds are acting properly. I can look at phasing. I can find out exactly what's going on inside of my audio world. So there's a lot of opportunities to use this one scope in different positions, and using either the WebRTC platform or the VNC platform, you could easily make the correlation that this device doesn't necessarily have to sit in that exact position. As long as there is a monitor, there is a way to get this feed to that monitor. Similarly, if I'd like to take a look at my 2110 network, I can come in and immediately I'll start to switch over to a 2110 input, and I'll actually see my 2110 flows here. So I can take a look at everything that's coming in on this SFP. And again, we'll go into these tiles in a little bit more detail as time moves on here. But just as a brief overview on the presets, I'd like you to see how easy it is to transition into different presets. So similarly, you can see here that I've only changed one tile in this, and I'm actually just going to look at my my PTP timing against my analog black so that I can decide if I need to swing my black a little bit and make sure that I'm in the ballpark for my analog reference being tied to my PTP reference. So you've seen how easy it is to use presets. To save presets, it's just as easy. I can just come to an empty slot and click Save As, and I can go ahead and I can save a new preset. And now whenever I call this back, it's always going to come back to exactly this. So I'll look at my audio real quick, and immediately I'm able to switch back to the preset that I had just created. So this leads to the ability to actually save and download these presets so that you can really make all of your paths and your looks similar across all of the devices in your network. So if you want your camera shaders to always be looking at a certain part of the waveform, we can make sure that that's happening. Or if you want your engineering staff to always be looking at one portion of the data list, we can make sure that they're always looking at the same thing that you want them to look at. So you're going to have the ability to make sure that you're always staying within your parameters. So to go a little bit further, we can actually take a look at the ability to create this bottom row here. I can decide what my most used tiles are, and I can place them down in here. So I can look at all of the options available to me, and then I can actually go ahead and decide what I want in any of these tiles. Now, I was doing a demo with 2110, so I had decided that I was going to have all of my options be 2110 related, but I can just as easily come over to here and decide that I'm going to do something else. We'll save it and we'll call it a day. So now I can pull up any of these tiles in any one of these quadrants. And as previously shown, it's just as easy to go full screen or to make it half screen. Now, what we tried to do is make this as intuitive as possible. So what you're looking at is your base layout, and then as soon as we click tiles, you can see there's a cyan view around the tile that is highlighted. So that now means that I can go into the settings menu of that tile and actually take a look at the different options available. So I can look at exactly what this device is looking at to make sure that my input is what I'm expecting. I can go ahead and decide if there's going to be closed captions on the device, and I can push play on my closed caption provider. And I can show you that just by going back to my presets and making sure that I choose my shading position. Again, you'll create them however you'd like. I can change my inputs right from this device. So to go back into the tiles menu here, there's no closed captions right now, but if I want to start monitoring closed captions, we can take a look here and you can start to see that there are closed captions available. So the ability to look at and configure these tiles and customize them the way that you'd like is extremely easy. I can take a look at my percentage of HDR, which is extremely important when you're doing HDR productions because you don't want to actually put too much of your content in the HDR space. You typically want to aim for, I've seen everything from roughly 5% all the way up to 20% of your actual data should be in the HDR space. And you're able to accurately and quickly look at this to make sure that that's where you are. Similarly, if I want to, I can actually go in and I could even pick a certain pixel to find out what my light levels are. So if you're having trouble with a set, if you're looking at a video that doesn't seem quite right, we can go in and we can pick out the point and actually look at what's going on in that exact pixel. And you can see here, as I drag it around, we're able to watch the light level change. So if I want to, I can go to the false color if we're going to do HDR, and I can decide that I'm either going to use a color space to make sure that I'm actually looking at what's inside of 709, or I could do luminance as well. And the even better part is we can actually go ahead and lay out what these things are going to be referencing so that you can see exactly what's going on in your picture. So next, what I like to do typically is I like to take a look at all of the 2110 options available, because that is becoming more and more prevalent as time goes on. And it's still kind of a little bit of a black box for most folks, where everybody is starting to get it and it's starting to make sense, but there's still a little bit of information that needs to be disseminated, and people are still learning how to properly use PTP and really creating the flows in SMPTE 2110. So what you can see here is I'm looking at what's actually physically on my SFP, looking at over here, I'll highlight this, looking over here at what's happening inside of the device. And this information can be extremely useful in this area if you're having trouble with your 2110 streams, to actually go in to do a packet capture and look at it in Wireshark to see if you're actually getting what you're expecting to get from the device. I can confirm that I have -40 information, so the ancillary data. And similarly, I can look at my PTP information to find out what's going on in my best master clock algorithm. So I can look at the Grandmaster and recognize that I'm actually attached to a GNSS system, which is also available here. You can see that I'm in multicast. Some people prefer unicast or a mixed messaging, which we can get to at a later point in time down the road. But I'm able to accurately diagnose my 2110 network. And you can see right now, I don't have an MMOS server available because I don't have MMOS enabled on my device. If I did have MMOS senders, it would be extremely easy for me to go in and turn on my MMOS. And what would happen is the registration server would start, and we would actually be able to tell that, okay, I am connected to a registration server. I've seen a last SDP file, so I know that I'm getting valid data and valid information. So I can use these tools to not only diagnose my 2110 network, but to build it. So if you're looking at your multicast network and you want to make sure that you have the accurate flows going to the correct places, I can do something as simple as making this tile slightly bigger so that we can see everything from my bit rates and payload ID, which is going to tell you what kind of a flow it is, not only just the protocol, but I can actually look at the sender. I know who is sending these streams. Similarly, I can actually take a look at what's going on within my RTP. So you can see here an RTP clock is going to be showing you that is my clocking for my audio channels. You can see over here the RTP marker. Obviously, I'm at 5994 for my frame rate. And I actually have a lot of information available to me just at a glance, let alone if we decide to go further into it. So there's a lot of different opportunities available for the PRISM lineup, and you're able to do a lot of diagnosing with the PRISM, but you're also able to actually make sure that you're using these devices in a way that is beneficial to your facility. So another thing that I like to take a look at is I like to look at my PTP timing. It's one of those things that you always want to make sure that in a 2110 network, you have PTP available to you and it is stable and solid. So I can actually make sure that my peer-to-peer, my primary and backup, everything is always in sync and looking at the correct source. Now, we are capable of doing 2022-7, so you can configure for multiple primary and redundant streams based upon the ability to have enough bandwidth on your SFP. But really what we're looking at is just making sure that our network is ready to go. It's aware of what's happening, why it's happening, and how it's happening. So to look even further, we can come into here and I can actually do customized alarms. So I can decide what is going to alarm and why it's going to alarm. So if you are looking specifically at HDR and you want to know if you are over your HDR percentage, you can edit this. You can make sure that this is exactly how you want to alarm and why you want to alarm. Similarly, if there is a loudness issue, if you don't have any audio at all, we can immediately alarm. Now, one of the cooler features that I like to talk about really quickly is the idea that you can actually control this using an API. So APIs are all the rage, and everybody's starting to use them to control devices, to alarm, to make sure that you have all the information available to you. And that's something that is only going to increase as time goes on. So the API functionality is extremely important for anyone that has a background in IT or wants to build specific views or specific use cases. It's easily done via an API, and you can do extremely customized things. Now, one thing that I didn't mention about the device as a whole is we've really taken out the need to think about what options you need to purchase as hardware. So what I mean by that is the only decisions you have to make off the bat are the form factor and what kind of functionality you want on a physical level. All of the other options here are all software defined. So we can talk about these things and you can demo these options and you don't have to purchase them immediately. So if you only have X amount of budget for your year, we can say, hey, let's get the scope in, let's take a look at it, let's do a demo on the options available. And if you find yourself, say, needing HDR and you weren't expecting it, we can very quickly and efficiently just add a license to your device. These devices are able to do all of these features just by actually using a software-defined license. So checking in to see, are there any questions so far? Been talking for just a little while here, and I want to make sure that if there are questions, I'm able to answer them for you guys. Doesn't look like it just yet.
And I'll ask, do you, I think PTP is maybe unfamiliar territory to most SDI folks.
Sure.
Is there an easy place for people to go to kind of get a overview, what it's all about, to help kind of prepare what the world looks like in 2110 and PTP?
Sure. So there are a number of resources online for 2110 and PTP. I'm actually honestly working on a few things for Telestream customers at this point in time to help out with training and dissemination of information about 2110 and PTP. But SMPTE also offers a course. There are some great resources online on YouTube. I know that's sometimes surprising to say, but all of us in the tech industry are a little bit more aware of the use case of YouTube and things like ChatGPT to actually go through and answer questions or start to come up with information regarding PTP and 2110. Dennis, does that kind of answer your question? I know it's a little bit of a non-answer, but there are a lot of really great things out there, and if it's something that you'd like to see, we're more than happy to create training sessions for you. And we actually have quite a few videos out on our network, as well as white papers that will kind of help you out with what is PTP? Why does it exist? What is the point of having nanosecond or lower sync?
Yep. So I think you're saying in general, if you search around on the Telestream website, you have a number of videos and some material there. That'd be a good place to start, right?
Yes. And of course, you can contact me at any point in time, and I'm more than happy to share some of the links that I've found useful in terms of learning 2110 and PTP timing. We do have a question in the chat. So the price range is not something that I'm able to directly discuss. I can only do the list price because I am not actually able to do any quotes. So I'd have to talk with Dennis about the pricing. But the 200 series is something that I would recommend that you start with, something that makes sense for your plan. So I know that's a non-answer, but it's something that is highly personal based on what you're actually doing with the device. So are you a 2110 network, or are you using this as an engineering scope, or is it just a shading scope? And that's really why we wanted to customize it so much and give you the opportunity to make this device what you want it to be. Francis, that may not necessarily answer your question, but I would love to go through it a little bit further with you at a later point in time, if that's something that you'd be interested in. There are some other questions in the chat, or is there anyone looking for engineering scope for multiple purposes? Okay. So what I would really do then in that case is I personally would take a look at a 300 series, because that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck, because you're not only going to have the ability to do 2110 and SDI, but for your baseband plant, you're going to have the ability to look at your eye pattern and your jitter. So what we're going to do there is we would say probably a 300 series. My bet is I would look at something like the IP measure. If you're currently doing 2110, it's a invaluable feature set. The prod license, again, if you're doing HDR, that's something that I would highly recommend. I would absolutely recommend the ENGQC license, because if it's an engineering scope, you're going to have to be looking at SCSI triggers. You're going to have to be looking at closed captioning. And sure. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of how you would want to go about building this. I would absolutely say it would be probably a 300 series based upon the idea that it's going to be an engineering scope. And then I would add in the audio license, the ENG license, and that'll kind of give you a baseline as to what's going on. And then we would move forward with things like, are you doing Dolby? Are you doing surround sound? Are you doing HDR? Is 4K a requirement? So those are the kind of questions that we would ask on a call and kind of dial in what your hope would be for the scope and what you truly need. So I see another question in the chat from Scott asking, how does the user select the output on the headphones? So what I can do here is I'll pull my device back up, and what I'll do here is I can actually take a look at the outputs, and you can look and see here, we can decide where we're going with our audio outputs. But if I go into audio here, sorry. I can decide what we're monitoring in the audio outputs very quickly and efficiently. And that, Scott, is actually a feature of the 4.0 release, where previously you were only able to get a stereo pair off of the headphone output. Now it's going to be a little bit more nuanced, that you could actually take a look at what you specifically want to monitor and why you want to monitor it. And the audio mapping you can find in your settings and your audio. Oh, no, I'm so sorry. Your inputs. My apologies. So I can actually take a quick look here, and we can map what's happening in our audio workflow. So I can decide what my configuration is, and if I want to go all the way up to 7.1, or if I just want to keep it at stereo, I can actually take a look at what I'm going to be monitoring. And then using the tool down below, you're able to actually select what the audio output to the headphone jack is. Dennis, do you see any other questions currently?
I think Scott just asked one about that output is 2-channel, correct? I think he was the headphone
Yes.
question.
The output is a stereo output for the MPS and the MPD. On the MPP 200 and 300 series, you actually have 8 analog outputs available to you. So that'll be on a DB25. So it's really the form factor that you're going to use is going to be how you decide what the audio outputs are going to be.
This isn't a question, but I have to comment on what you showed earlier about the ability to record a session. Is really cool, because I'm so often listening to conversations where we need a vendor to see what we're seeing and that sort of thing. So the ability to record a file of what the instrument sees, that's really going to be helpful in asking vendors for support on their product and that sort of thing.
Well, so it's really easy to download that and record it as long as you want to be able to take a look at it. And again, for troubleshooting, it's absolutely invaluable tool to be able to say, this is what's happening on my network currently, because everybody knows that as soon as you bring somebody in to look at something, the problem goes away. So the ability to capture an issue as it's happening is extremely valuable to any engineering department.
Yeah, we've come a long way from simple rasterizers, haven't we?
Absolutely. And the feature sets are only going to continue to get better. So in the near future, we're talking about being able to actually output the rasterizer on a 2110 flow, so that you could actually put that right back into your router, so you can pass it around your network if you're in a 2110 facility. Similarly, we're looking to add JPEG XS support in the near future. So you'll be able to look at compressed video, and that'll actually be extremely useful, especially if you are in a bandwidth condensed network where maybe you only have a 10 gig infrastructure and you need all of your streams to be compressed. So using SMPTE 2110-22, you'll be able to get a lot more feeds out of your network than just doing uncompressed 2110-20. Are there other questions? I'd like to maybe zone in a little bit more if there are specific questions, just because an hour for an overview, you kind of get a sense of it, but you don't necessarily get into specific use cases or things that people actually want to see in their devices.
If you don't have any other questions coming in, Ken, one of the questions that I know Telestream and Tektronix for decades has always done a really nice job of putting order information on their spec sheets or web page. Maybe if there's time today, if you could maybe go through like that ordering information and just a double verification of what you'd get, like and what you need to order when you order the unit, what can be done later. I don't know if you're at a place where you can easily show that data, but I think that that's always helpful. So often people ask us by part number, here's what I want quoted, but the more they know what they're thinking of when they ask for that, that might help to get what you want.
So really, again, I always sort of default back to the idea that it's a matrix, and the only things that you have to make a decision on off the bat are your form factor and what kind of plant you're going to be using or what kind of plant you'd like to use in the future. So again, something like the 100 series across the line is always going to be baseband SDI only. Now, you still have access to all of the applications just as in every other device. It's just your inputs will always be baseband, and that is what the scope will do for the entirety of its life. The 200 series will allow for both SDI and IP inputs. And again, the only reason that we split this off into the 300 series is because it requires a specific board to do the physical eye pattern and jitter. So the 300 series is going to be your true engineering scope where you need it to be able to do anything and everything in any sort of situation. After that, any of these options can be purchased after the fact. So if you are not currently doing HDR, but you see that you have a need for it next year, Dennis, we can get on the phone immediately with the customer and say, okay, you'd like the HDR feature set. We can have that to you as soon as you'd like. So it's very quick and very efficient to be able to add licensing and to add capability to the device. As far as a specific data sheet, I would have to work with my partners in the sales department to come up with a data sheet that would fit the specific customer. Jonathan, there will be support for JPEG XS. It is on the roadmap. It is not currently an implemented feature. It is something that we're actively working on, and my hope is that we will be releasing that sometime around NAB.
Thoughts on Dante and NDI?
So Dante and NDI, as well as SRT, are things that we're currently looking at. They are things that we have some other products within the Telestream portfolio that are available to help support the need to look at Dante, NDI, SRT. But in terms of the PRISM at this point in time, the feature sets that we're looking at is primarily the 2110 and SDI. Now, of course, if you have a need, that's not to say that we're not going to put it towards the top of the list. It's more so just a question of how many users currently need it. And honestly, I'd be interested from the group here, how many of you would be interested in NDI or SRT, because our team is always looking for it. Yes, the same would be said of wrist. So any transport stream protocol or any sort of packaging, all of them are possible. It's just what is being used most in the market and what is the next step for us will, of course, be what feature set the most people want. So it's absolutely possible there is no limit on our FPGA to be able to say, no, we'll never do RISC, no, we'll never do SRT. It's more so just a conversation of, is this something that we can put towards the top of the product roadmap, or is this something that we have other feature sets requested by customers that are more beneficial to the overall platform? So it's absolutely possible. It's just a question of what is being used and what do people want. We're always listening to suggestions, and I encourage you to reach out if you have specific use cases, because honestly, personally, I would love to see NDI and SRT as well as RISC in our product portfolio in the PRISM. And it's really just gathering the amount of customers and clients that are requesting those features so that it can get put higher on the roadmap. So hopefully that answers your question, Jonathan. And what I'll do is I will actually come over to here so that you can have my contact information and you're able to reach out if you do have specific questions. If you'd like to see a demo that would fit your specific use case, Dennis has all of my contact information. If you reach out to him, we're able to work directly with Heartland to make sure that we're answering any questions that you do have, that we're able to show you the feature sets that you are interested in. And again, any feedback is great feedback because it's going to show us where we need to go in the market to make sure that we remain the primary choice for all of you.
Well, thanks so much, Ken, for putting this together. It was informative for me to see some of these new capabilities, and I'm a former engineer, so I don't get to touch all these things as I have different roles these days. But there's a lot of features there that are important. I can surely say, from my point of view, I think SRT and RISC would be high on my list from the number of projects I see us working on. And I know Dante is pretty popular these days for broadcast news environments in their audio connections, but there may be other products they're using there, like a Wohler or TSL rack mounted speaker or something like that. So Dante, I'm not so sure that there's not other things in use there. SRT and RISC, you're often really using the vendor product to look at packet counters and things like that, from what I understand. So
Yeah,
maybe a third-party
absolutely.
instrument there would be of use. So.
Yeah, and again, we are having active conversations regarding SRT, so I'd be interested to see how many folks are actually using RISC, because with the implementation of JPEG XS, it's not necessarily a heavy lift to use RISC in a matter that people are typically using it, let alone with AVC or HEVC. If you want to start playing the game of AV1 or VVC, it's really just a question of what do you guys want to see and what is going to make your lives easier, because that's what this is all about, is giving you guys the tool sets to make your lives easier. And that's what we want to do.
Great. Any other questions? I think we've exhausted our question asking time. So I appreciate everyone for joining today. And again, you'll get a link to the recording if there's anything you want to watch again. And any other questions, you can surely email Ken or myself, and we'll work to get them answered for you. Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody, for your time today. Greatly appreciated. And as Dennis mentioned, reach out to Dennis and I, and we're happy to work with you in the future.
Okay, good day.